Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special webinar event. Tonight, we'll be focusing on how we can chase peak performance in our cattle by building healthier and more productive herds with trace minerals. My name is Alex Roberts, Product Manager for the Livestock Nutrition range at Virbac. Today, we have a very special guest speaker, Dr. John Arthington, all the way from the US. We also have Dr. Paula Gonzalez-Rivers presenting tonight as well, and she is our Virbac's Senior Technical Services Manager for Livestock Nutrition. A quick intro on our speakers for tonight. So Dr. John Arthington is a graduate of the Animal Sciences departments of Purdue and Kansas State Universities. His research and extension programs focus on the management and nutrition of grazing beef cattle with an emphasis on mineral nutrition and their impacts on cattle stress and productivity. John has contributed to over 125 peer-reviewed publications and has mentored numerous graduate students. As an extension specialist, John has raised awareness of important trace mineral deficiencies impacting the beef industry. As a result, effective and efficient supplementation strategies have been developed and implemented. Dr. Paula Gonzalez-Rivers is the Senior Technical Services Manager for Livestock at Virbac, Australia. She's a veterinarian with a Master's in Animal Studies from the University of Queensland and a PhD in Agricultural Sciences from the University of Melbourne. She brings a wealth of experience, having spent 5 years in both small and large animal practice in Chile, as well as 6 years conducting research in ruminant nutrition and heat stress management. Right, so before we begin, we'll just go through a little bit of housekeeping so everyone is comfortable with the webinar platform we're on. So those who have logged on today, you should be able to see my presentation, which currently shows my mobile number. If you experience any issues, please don't hesitate to send me a message at the number on your screen, or you can also send me a live chat and I'll try to get to you as soon as I can. If you don't have audio or lose audio during the session, please close the window and rejoin using the same link in your email. On this next slide, you should be able to see an image of your webinar control panel. If you want my attention at any time throughout the webinar, you can click on the little hand symbol at the bottom left hand of your screen. If you have any questions or like to chat with me during the session, simply click on the first button shown inside this circle at the top right hand side of your window. You'll then have the ability to type and send through any questions. Feel free to send any questions anytime throughout the webinar. If they are urgent, I'll reply immediately via chat. Otherwise, any questions asked we put in a queue and answered after the presentation. And of course, all questions asked will remain anonymous. And just a final point, today's presentation will be recorded and made available to all attendees as well. So with that said, we'll now jump into today's webinar. I'll flick it over to you, John, to get things started.
Okay, thank you. Can you see that okay, Alex?
That's looking good so far. If you want to put it in presentation mode.
Okay. It is in presentation mode on my end, so let me try it one more time.
If you go back to the screen you're on, and you just hit the little square in the bottom right-hand corner, it should present.
Okay. Is that working, Alex?
No, I think do what you did the first time. Or you can maybe slide your presentation over to this screen, and then you should be able to see it. If you click on that. There you go. And now click the little square in the bottom right-hand corner.
Okay.
That one. And you should be good to go.
All right.
All
Good.
right. It hasn't been present mode yet. There we go. Perfect. Got it. You're
That's
good.
good.
Apologies,
Okay.
everyone. We're rolling. It
Very
is
good.
5 a.m. in America at the moment, where John is. So,
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and good evening in your part of the world. It's a pleasure to share this information with you. And as Alex said, in 24, I had an opportunity to make my second trip with Verbac to Australia and visit with a lot of people about trace mineral nutrition of cattle. In specific, my focus is in grazing ruminants. And so there's a lot of commonality between both countries in terms of the production of beef. And in a forage based system, I put this slide up to give you some context of the size of the two countries and the influence that both areas have in worldwide beef production. And also, I think one interesting thing to keep in mind is the forage-based systems that utilize what we call C4 forages, or forages that are more adapted to warm climates, are share some commonality in both countries. But they also share commonality with problems associated with trace mineral nutrition. And that's what we're going to focus on in this presentation. So there's 4 to 5 elements that I'm going to discuss, and I'll get into those more individually. But then bring up the topic of supplementation when these elements are found to be deficient in that forage base or that grazed forage base. And then end my presentation with my experiences with injectable trace minerals, some of the science behind them, and the applications where they can be applied to the system. So I think you might have seen this slide. It's used quite a bit, but it gives a timeline on when we identify trace mineral deficiencies impact on productivity of the grazing cow herd. And almost always that is found to impact immunity first. And the reason for that is that a lot of these elements we're talking about are cofactors in an enzyme. So many of you know what enzymes are, and many enzymes are what we call metalloenzymes. These are enzymes that require a metal, an inorganic metal, to be functional. And so these essential trace elements are part of these metalloenzyme systems, which impact immunity generally first. Now, a lot of times we don't see that, right? You don't visually see that symptom of deficiency until we get into the clinical signs. And that's what you see further over to the right. But we're impacting other important physiological systems prior to visually seeing it as a clinical system or a clinical sign. So that brings up the point then about deficiency. And there's 2 types of deficiencies that we see in mammals. One is primary deficiency, and it's simple. It's just the deficiency that results from inadequate intake of the mineral. And this is generally quite rare in modern livestock systems, although we still see it, from time to time, sometimes more frequently than we would like. But the second one, secondary deficiency, is probably the more common, particularly in modern or advanced production systems. And that's where the animal is consuming an adequate amount of the trace mineral, but that mineral is being antagonized by some other element and is reducing its availability and resulting in deficiency. So these are the differences, primary and secondary deficiency. The good news is we know what these cattle need, right? That's something that gives us quite an advantage. So if we can overcome the issues related with supplementation, and we can overcome the issues related to antagonists, and then meet these deficiencies, we should have no problem. So that's the good news in this trace mineral story. So I'm going to cover 5 elements because I'm going to include chromium as well. But in terms of supplementation, the most common elements that are supplemented are these four: selenium, copper, zinc, and manganese. And really, of those, the three, copper, selenium, and zinc, become the central theme of the story. So I often say that every discussion about trace mineral nutrition of grazing cattle often becomes a selenium story. But this is only an issue if you're in a soil selenium deficient area of the world. The reason for that is all these elements that we're talking about, the plant also has a requirement for the minerals. The plant growing in the soil, all of them, with the exception of selenium. Plants have no selenium requirement. Therefore, when you find selenium in the forage, it exists there because it's been taken up out of the soil in what we call a luxury accumulation fashion. So by mapping the soil selenium concentrations, we can have a really good idea of the selenium content of the forages. So if you look in the US in the southeast, where I'm from, we have very low soil selenium concentrations. Really, much of the US is this way. But if you look up in the upper high plains like the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, they have high soil selenium concentrations. Their forages are high in selenium, and therefore selenium becomes less of an issue. Selenium is also interesting compared to the other elements in that toxicity can be a concern. And generally speaking, we don't need to supplement more than 3 milligrams of selenium a day. That's adequate amount for grazing cattle. But what happens if they don't get adequate selenium? Well, we know the clinical deficiency or the clinical disease is recognized by a condition that we call white muscle disease. And that results in low fertility, retained placentas, and immune competence, reduced immune competence. And if you look at the picture over here, this is a very typical white muscle disease in calf heart tissue. But I would also ask you to recognize that the subclinical condition we often refer to as weak calf syndrome. These are animals that aren't clinically defined as having white muscle disease, but just have poor muscle vigor, and the calves don't get up quickly after birth and suckle, and just have low thrift and survivability. So selenium is important for immune competence, and I'd like to use this slide. This is from Dr. Bill Weiss at Ohio State University, and he did a simple correlation. He just looked at dairy farms. He looked at their bulk tank somatic cell count and the average herd selenium status. And what he saw was, as you improved herd selenium status, you had a very linear decrease in bulk tank somatic cell count. It's a pretty neat correlation to show you how selenium can play a role in herd immune competence. But in the beef side of the world, I think one of the most important impacts is immune competence at the time of weaning. So milk and forage are low in selenium. They're poor sources of selenium, almost always. So calves are born selenium adequate. And you see in this figure here, calves at 150 days of age are highly selenium adequate. These happen to be calves from our research center. But then as they age and get close to weaning at around 250 days, they become quite selenium marginal. And this is despite the fact that there is selenium fortified salt supplement in the pasture. The calves have access to it, but they don't consume enough of it to satisfy their selenium requirement. It's this selenium deficiency at the time of weaning that I believe is a major impact, can be a major impact on subsequent immune competence and performance. So let's move on to copper. Next to selenium, copper is generally worldwide the most limiting nutrient. As I spoke about before, it's essential for many different enzymes. However, deficiencies are often the result of the antagonists molybdenum and sulfur, with sulfur being the most important. Molybdenum can act as an antagonist to the sulfur antagonism. And so that's why I mentioned that there. So there's a lot of different sources of sulfur that cattle can get from fertilizers, from feed, supplements, uh, and also from atmospheric deposition for countries that are burning high sulfur coal. When you supplement copper, you should avoid copper oxide. And today, 30 years ago, I would run into that sometimes quite frequently. But today, I don't see it much at all. What I do see is people that forget, or nutritionists that forget, that copper should be supplemented at a ratio of 1 to 3 with zinc. That's 3 times the amount of zinc, supplemental zinc, in relation to copper. Because neither of these elements have a very low threshold for toxicity, they can be easily supplemented. A lot of times people believe they have a copper deficiency problem when maybe they don't. So they oversupplement it, they forget about increasing the zinc, and then they inadvertently cause zinc deficiency. So you want to keep that in mind. And also you want to remember to avoid supplementing copper from dissolved copper sulfate in water. I'll talk about that a little more. A lot of times people utilize hair coat color as an indicator of copper deficiency, and indeed it can be an indicator, but I think it's overused. Copper is one of those metalloenzymes I spoke about, uh, impacts the impacts the element that causes hair coat color, melanin, and the conversion of melanin. And so you can see that here, that animals that cattle with copper deficiency have this hair coat difference that can be reversed with copper supplementation. But there's a lot of other things that can cause poor hair coat shedding that gets blamed on copper deficiency. I tell people to look at the gray ring around the eyes of cattle, sometimes a gray ring around the muzzle, and that can be an indicator of copper deficiency or low. The enzyme that for the conversion of melanin is called tyrosinase, and that can be an indicator of copper deficiency. Let's move on to zinc. Zinc is very abundant in the body. And in fact, if it weren't for the iron associated with hemoglobin, zinc would be the most abundant trace mineral in the body. I always tell people that zinc is important for any physiological function that requires rapidly dividing cells, and that's because of its essentiality in RNA and DNA metabolism. So when you think about that, think about tissues such as your skin, uh, hooves, immune cells, spermatogenesis, oogenesis. So we've done some work years ago showing that young developing bulls, particularly bulls that are targeted to become sexually mature by the time that they're 12 to 15 months of age, you can increase zinc supplementation and have a positive impact on reproductive function. Zinc requirement is 30 milligrams per kilogram dry matter intake. It's not uncommon to see bulls developed at 60 part per million zinc in the diet. Now, manganese is less interesting, but for a couple of reasons. One is that forages are generally adequate in manganese. It's difficult to find low manganese forages. But the other thing is, a lot of times we don't see the impacts of manganese deficiency until the next generation. So it's these longer term generational impacts. Because forages are generally adequate, there are regional differences. And so forages grown on alkaline soils, high pH soils, can be lower in manganese. And if cattle are being supplemented a high grain diet, can also have low manganese in the overall diet. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about chromium, just one slide. Multi-men in some areas of the world have an option for the addition of chrome. It was recognized as being potentially limiting trace element in the late 1990s, and both in cattle and in non-ruminants. Probably, without a doubt, the data has expanded more rapidly in non-ruminants, particularly swine. Early on, it was called glucose tolerating factor, and the reason is that we could supplement chromium during a glucose challenge, and you could see it disappear from the bloodstream more efficiently or more rapidly. All right, we call that a glucose challenge. So we know that that chromium is important for insulin activity. So it could have an impact on high performing cattle. And Jerry Spears did a review of chromium in livestock diets not too long ago. And he found that it could be particularly important in finishing cattle that are fed high protein diets. Now, in the late 90s, mid 90s, Mowat from Canada, he published a series of papers where they saw an improvement in stress responses of cattle that these were in weaned stressed cattle that were consuming chromium supplementation. Was that related to the improved insulin activity in those cattle? I don't think that that's been answered yet, but there certainly is some opportunity for investigating that further. So I want to move on now to the second part of my presentation related to supplementation. And you've all seen this before. I use it in my class here at the University of Florida. It's called the Liebig's Law of the Minimum. And the great illustration is shown here. Now, this is actually put together for fertilizers to show that if you don't meet the plant's minimal nutrient requirement, increasing other nutrients really provides no advantage. So understanding what the minimum the most limiting nutrient in the diet is, and addressing that is most important before you address the supplementation of others. So understanding the limiting factor is the issue here. So cattle that are grazing, they get trace minerals from a variety of sources. The feed, the forage that they consume is generally the largest mass, but then they can also receive minerals from the water that they consume. And there's a lot of mineral that is achieved through the ingestion of soil during the grazing process. Now, if we understand what the limiting nutrient is, well, then we can address it through supplementation. And there's different ways of doing that. And I combine these into what we call indirect and direct methods. Now, the indirect methods are simple things that you might not have thought about. If you're in a planted pasture situation, you change forage species or you add maybe a legume to your grazing system, that's indirect. If you add an amendment to your soil, like changing pH, or maybe even add an element in your fertilizer, and that's called fortification, where people, for example, can add selenium in their fertilizer to increase plant selenium concentrations. The more common approach is the direct method, and that's simply supplementing trace elements to the grazing animal to meet that insufficiency, right? So we'll talk about that more. So the most common method, direct method for mineral fortification, is the fortification of salt, and then provide that to grazing cattle free choice. In some parts of the world, Australia included, that's called a lick. And so these salt licks come in many different formulation types, but they all are based on the same concept, and that's utilizing the seasonally impacted craving for salt to deliver other minerals that are mixed in that salt. To do this effectively, people have to understand intake behavior and understand what the forage mineral characteristics are. So by far, when you utilize this salt-based system, the most important concept is managing intake. And I want to talk about that a little further. Cattle do not have a nutritional wisdom to consume free choice mineral, or any mineral for that regard. The consumption is only driven by the craving for salt in this type of system. So managing that intake is the most important effort that a producer can make. You often have heard people say when they talk about a lick, they say they're eating a lot of the lick, so they must be lacking in something. Or they aren't eating the mineral, so they must not need it. And both of these are wrong. The cattle are only consuming that lick because of changes in their craving for salt alone. So by managing that, you'll do the best job in ensuring that they are getting adequate mineral intake. And there's many things that impact salt craving, but the one that does it the most is forage moisture content. As forage moisture goes down, the craving for salt goes down. Now we can see this in studies or even in just practical applications. You can have the same forage and have it ensiled where it's high moisture. Cattle will consume a lot more lick than if that exact same forage was dried and stored as dry hay. The animals consume it there. If they're receiving additional supplementation through an energy or protein source, they crave salt less. And sometimes you can have high sodium in the water they're drinking. If that water is high in sodium, they're getting the sodium from the water and they crave salt less. And here's just an example in these two figures. Targeting 85 grams a day over many months, you're not going to have it exact all the time, but that variation generally, if it's done correctly, will meet the target. So a lot of people ask me about blocks and tubs, and I always tell people they're not all created equal. Generally, these hard salt blocks are inadequate to deliver the amount of trace mineral supplement required, but they're better than nothing. And we use them in the United States, and I know other parts of the world, particularly in areas where it's difficult to get regular mineral supplementation to the cattle. It can last for a long period of time. These cooked blocks are generally based on molasses. They're very hard. They can be a very good method of supplementing trace minerals, but they generally are the most expensive per unit of mineral delivered. I wanted to share with you also water sources. This is an opportunity where you can dissolve water or dissolve mineral in water and use that as a delivery mechanism. It's quite uncommon for ruminant animals in most parts of the world. It is quite common for non-ruminants, particularly poultry. But the issue with it is that you change what's called speciation of the mineral. That's just the electron association with that element. And when you do that, that impacts the antagonisms that they can have with other minerals, and it will also impact availability. One of the problems we run into is some elements, such as copper, when it's dissolved in water, it becomes much more, the potential for toxicity becomes much greater. And I've seen this, at least in the US, where Jersey cattle that are sensitive to copper have consumed water sources where copper sulfate was added in a foot bath and impacted those animals negatively. Now, I also run into cases where people dissolve copper sulfate in water as an algicide. So that does a great job keeping the water clean, at least appears clean, but that can be problematic for supplementation of those animals. So I want to move on now to the last part of my presentation, where I'm going to talk to you about injectable trace minerals. Now, I had an opportunity to meet the folks that created Multimin in South Africa many years ago, just through a fortunate group of events. And I had been studying trace minerals for a number of years before I had this introduction. And in fact, injectable trace minerals, or the Multimin product, had been in the United States for a number of years before I met these individuals, but it was not utilized very much. What had happened from about that introduction on changed everything. A gentleman named Dr. Lawrence Havinga is a veterinarian from South Africa. He moved to the United States and took over the research and marketing of the product. And he pulled together myself and about four of my colleagues for a meeting. And he divided us up into areas of expertise. And he wanted us to study those specific areas. And he did something that was quite remarkable. He asked that we all speak to each other and share our results during the process. He wanted to make sure that his investment in research gained as much knowledge as possible, as fast as possible. So I'd have to tell you, at that time, it was a lot of fun, and we learned a lot. I'm only going to share with you just briefly some of the things that we learned in our lab over that period of time. So I'm interested in my lab in how we can utilize trace mineral nutrition to impact stress in beef cattle. Now, stress is inevitable, so we're just going to assume it's there, right? And so you can have things that I think a lot of people think about stress, they think about disease. But the largest stress that an animal will ever experience is the permanent separation of the calf from the cow. And we see really large stress responses then. So during the stress response, minerals are lost from the body. So feed intake is reduced, so there's fewer minerals that are coming in the body. And I want you to look at the slide over on the right. And all this does is shows that as copper status increases, we have a larger pro-inflammatory response to stress. Unfortunately, these data are sometimes construed as being negative, but that's not the case. As we are able to better support a natural inflammatory response to stress, we support overall immune function. And I'm going to show you that in the next couple slides. So we started to understand that ITM, or injectable trace minerals, increases animal mineral status and then results in a more competent pro-inflammatory response to stress. And you can see that here in the open circles. When animals are receiving injectable trace minerals, they have this more robust pro-inflammatory response. So what ended up happening is Dr. Havinga said, John, I want to try a study where we inject Multimin concurrent to vaccine. And then knowing that we can have this more profound pro-inflammatory response, maybe we'll have a better immune response to that vaccination. And I was not too sure about that. In fact, I could see where this could go the other way, where you could have a greater pro-inflammatory response that could potentially decrease the humoral immune response to the vaccine. So this was kind of a new area, but he wanted to do that anyhow. And we agreed that I would publish the results no matter what the outcome was. And then here's what we found, that when we took naive calves and delivered a commercial vaccine concurrent to Multimin, we have an increase, a greater humoral immune response. And this was the first time that this was shown in the scientific literature. Since that time, it's been shown many times. We followed that up with a study where we were trying to see, was this just due to the type of vaccine we were using, or was it truly a response of improved immune competence? So in this case, we injected PRBC. That stands for porcine red blood cells. So you would not think that cattle would ever have access to or ever seen pig red blood cells before, right? So we call that an immunogen. And it's just something that will not cause disease, but will cause an immune reaction. And you can see, again, if you do this concurrent to injectable trace minerals, you have a more profound humoral immune response. Here's some data from a colleague, Dr. Beth Kegley at University of Arkansas, where she took this science and put it into application. She studies highly stressed feeder cattle that are sourced from market barns. Now, we call them markets here in the US. These are where people bring their cattle to sell, and then a buyer will put together a truckload. We call it a potload of cattle, and then they go to a receiving yard. A lot of times those cattle are highly stressed. They come from multiple different sources and have a very highly variable vaccination and treatment history. And what she found is this is two injectable trace mineral treatments or no treatment. These are animals treated upon arrival to the receiving yard, and she sees reduced overall morbidity and then reduced number of animals that require a second and third antibiotic treatment. And then overall, there was a reduction in costs, antibiotic costs, and an improvement in body weight gain or final body weight of those calves. So this has probably become a very common application for multi-men in the United States. Others have shown the same type of responses that I was showing you before. Here's some data from University of Georgia that I've included here, and this is actually in dairy calves vaccinated against BVDV1, serotype 1. So I want to come to a conclusion here on my presentation and circle back and show you another application. This is probably the application in beef calves, that is has the most promise for injectable trace minerals. And if you see the area highlighted there, this is the selenium status of calves at weaning. Remember how I showed you that we wean a lot of calves that are marginal or maybe even selenium deficient at the time of weaning? If we can utilize injectable trace minerals prior to weaning, so the best application would be if you vaccinate your calves pre-weaning, which a lot of producers do throughout the world. If you do that concurrent to the delivery of injectable trace minerals, you'll do two things. You'll improve selenium status of those calves at weaning, so you're weaning selenium adequate calves, and you will improve the calves' ability to respond to that vaccine. So, in summary, injectable trace minerals can be a tool that can supplement shortfalls in this free choice mineral system. The things that I've talked to you about this evening are that it will ensure a known amount of trace mineral is delivered to every animal. So you remember I was telling you about how there is variability in mineral intake in the free choice system. This takes that variability out. Another thing that's widely accepted now is that it increases antibody production. You have a boosted humoral immune response when animals receive injectable trace minerals. And then it ensures mineral adequacy during these critical periods, such as weaning. Sometimes people ask me, why would I utilize those types of injectable mineral applications if I have a fair certainty that my animals are mineral adequate? And sometimes this application is called the top-up approach. So why would you do that? Well, I just showed you that when delivered concurrent to vaccine, you have this increased humoral immune response. In all of our studies, those animals were mineral adequate, but we still see this bolstered immune response when that delivered concurrent to injectable trace minerals, vaccine or immunogen delivery. But it also has an opportunity to improve mineral status just before a stress event, such as weaning or transportation. So you can have mineral adequate cattle that are just getting ready to go through a bout of stress, a stress that you know is coming. And you can utilize injectable trace minerals to bolster their mineral status prior to that stress to help ensure that those animals are adequate after that stress. These are just two approaches that we utilize and I thought might be interesting to you. So with that, it's about 12, 13 minutes after the hour, and have time, Paula and Alex, to address any questions that you might have.
Thanks, John. We'll jump to Paola quickly just to talk a bit about multimin, and then we'll jump. Following that, we'll look at questions. But guys, if you have any questions for John or Paola, please do get them in now.
Thank you. Thanks, John. That was a fantastic presentation. We always learn something new and fantastic from your experience on feeding animals and trace mineral nutrition. All right. So, okay, this is new information on the system. So here we are to present multimin chrome. So multimin chrome is the new member of the multimin family for cattle. We are very proud of this product. It took us more than 10 years of research and development and innovation from Vervac to have this product on the market. Vervac Australia is the second country in the world that has an injectable multimin formulation containing chromium on the market. And this is a fantastic, it's been in the market for since early this year, and the responses that we had from producers is really good. So I'm going now to flick to Alex, so we're going to have a small video for you to understand how multimin chrome works and what it can do for your cattle. Fantastic. So I will continue sharing my presentation. So with Multimint Chrome, our goal is to minimize the cause of stress. So basically, as John explained before, stress is inevitable from of our beef and dairy cattle operations. But we want this stress to be as short as possible and allow the animals to go back to normality as soon as possible. So with Multimint Chrome, we can minimize the cause of this stress and help animals to achieve optimal production. So Multimint Chrome combined the benefits of copper, selenium, zinc, manganese, and chromium, boosting the levels of trace minerals, improving the antioxidant status, supporting immunity, fertility, and performance. Multimint Chrome also boosts the levels of chromium, supporting stressful events, reducing cortisol levels, mitigating stress, and improving nutrient utilization. That makes Multimint Chrome essential component of your animal health and nutrition program. So as we always mention, Multimint can be used at the same time as oral supplements as a complement of good nutrition practices, and also associated with good and strategic drench management and good vaccination programs. As John explained, the best responses are seen when we use Multimint at the same time as vaccination. So this will help and support cattle productivity and to achieve them the best performance. So with Multimint Chrome, we maintain the same dose rate as Multimint Evolution for calves less than 1 year old, 1 milk per 50 kilos, from 1 to 2 years old, 1 milk per 75 kilos, and all the cows and bulls, 1 milk per 100 kilos. We recommend using Multimint Chrome in all classes of stock, particularly focusing on young stock, young calves at weaning or branding processes to support the stressful periods of weaning and separation from the maternal bond. We also recommend using pre-joining and also pre-calving in our cows and heifers. Multimint Chrome has 0 withholding period, same as with our Multimint Evolution. We also like to invite you to visit our new website when we have all the data that is being shared in our brochures and in our presentations, all the scientific data that back the success of our products, and also like several testimonials from our producers throughout the country. And here there's another messages from our marketing department.
Great, thanks Paola, and thanks John as well. Guys, if you have any questions, we will have some time to answer them, so please send them through now. As you're typing those in, we do have a bonus offer available from August to November this year. If you purchase 2 packs of Multimint Chrome and or Multimint Evolution 500ml or 550ml packs, you will receive a $50 voucher, so a little bit of a bonus as we go into the second half of this year and into spring. We'll be communicating this deal within the next week via email. Or you can take a screenshot now of the screen or scan the QR code for full details. So I'll leave that on the screen so you have time to have a read through of that, but we'll go to questions now. I've got a few that are popping through now. So the first one, is there any research available on the timings of utilizing Multimint, etc. before a stress event? For example, a week before weaning or a month before weaning, which has better results?
So maybe John can have some comments. Yeah.
The preference on our end is at least 2 weeks, but we generally are 30 days out from weaning, right? That's our goal, is to be 30 days out from weaning. And so, but it's not all, those events wouldn't be all the same. So for example, in terms of developing bulls, we utilize Multimint for bulls in the prior to the breeding season, and we're generally targeting 6 weeks. That's kind of the goal there, but definitely not less than 30 days in those animals. So if someone were thinking about a pre-weaning application, 30 days would be optimal for calves.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
this is probably same as the programs that we have here. It always depends on management and the ability that we have to handle those animals. But if producers are branding the cattle or doing some vaccinations before weaning, that we can also recommend using multimine at the same time of vaccination if they're doing it before the calves get weaned. And in terms of other type of management, like for example pre-joining and also pre-calving is 30 days before those periods, but other processes like transport or induction to feedlots, it can be done a week prior to transfer or 2 weeks prior to transfer or at the same time as the induction to feedlots if we are associating to the vaccination process, because we see that the responses are almost immediate to the vaccination process. So we don't need to wait long time for the antioxidant enzymes to start kicking up.
Cool. Thank you, Bella. Next question. This one is, what is the best vaccination site for multimin?
Or the site of injection. So
Best
multimine.
injection site, I presume that means.
Yeah. So the general recommendation for multimine, as it is a subcutaneous injection, is to do at the side of the neck, not too high in the ear, avoiding the areas of the jaw, like very similar recommendation as normal subcutaneous injections in the neck, separated from other injections. So if you are doing, let's say, vaccinations and multimine, use two different sides of the neck. If you're doing more than two and you have two at one side, separate by a hand width to the side from the other injection side.
Great. Next, this is for John. So you mentioned seasonality determines trace mineral intake. In your opinion, what's the best time to supplement multimin, during dry or wet conditions?
Well, I think that would have a major impact on the production system where it lines up with the dry and wet season. What I mean by that is conditions such as joining or weaning, because the use of the product is probably best targeted to those types of times in the production system where it can be most effective. However, I will say that during the dry season, craving for salt goes down. So throughout the world, if grazing herds are relying on a salt-based system to deliver supplemental trace nutrients, the intake will be reduced during the dry season, because during the wet season, the craving for salt increases. They naturally eat more. And so you have a greater opportunity for reduced intake via supplementation during the dry season.
Great, thank you.
I may also add that in our system where there may be less likely that producers may supplement through the year, during the wet season or during the green period of pasture growth, we can have a dilution of trace minerals. So this pasture may be growing very rapidly, but the levels of trace minerals are low. So as John mentioned, basically it's not whether it's dry or wet season. It's depending on what you want your animal to do. If you want to reproduce them, if you're weaning, if you are doing something, they need to be very well supplemented with trace minerals.
Right. Next one. In an early weaning situation due to drought, is it still worth treating the 5 to 6 month old weaners? Given John's slide that showed calves of that age were less deficient than 8 to 10 month old calves.
Yeah, so we work in early weaning systems here in research, and most of our early wean calves, and we're really early weaning, like 100 days, but those calves are generally adequate in minerals. However, we will go ahead and go through the vaccination protocol at that time, and they still have this enhanced immune response to injectable trace minerals. The early wean calves do. But it is correct that those early weaned calves are less likely to be deficient in trace minerals than a normal weaned calf. Just because, and the reason for that is that the cow will give everything she has to ensure that the calf is born mineral adequate. With the exception of selenium, it's difficult to create, even experimentally, to create a model that a newborn calf is deficient. But over time, that deficiency ensues up to weaning.
Following to that question, John, will that in that condition will be very good to also supplement the cow for her to be able to recover after that calving process and the early weaning?
Oh yeah, I think so, Paula. Yep. Calving is a very stressful event, so that if you keep intake static, you'll see the cow decrease after calving. Probably not just because of uterine involution, but also because of all the mineral that goes into colostrum. There's just a large mineral need at the time of calving and after as well.
Thanks, John and Paula. Next one. How on a limited budget can we identify trace mineral deficiency in our herd without relying on expensive lab tests? Are there any key visual or behavioral signs?
Unfortunately, no. It's just it's a limit. There's limits in animal nutrition. For example, we don't measure energy and protein status of our cow herd, right? We do that by visually looking at body condition score. And so a lot of the minerals that are supplemented come from regional knowledge of those elements that are deficient, and then observing improved performance when the animals are supplemented. And so this is very common. It's common everywhere. I like to use selenium as what I call a sentinel element. Because the supplementation range of selenium from toxicity to deficiency is so narrow, whole blood concentrations are quite adequate. If you have access to liver tissue from cull cows, you don't have to do biopsies, but from just cull cows that might be going through a local regional plant, you can get a really good idea of overall trace mineral status by looking at selenium and maybe copper too, to understand. But all of the other elements, zinc, manganese, cobalt, chromium, just do not have a reliable tissue indicator or blood indicator.
Okay, one final one before we end it. We've got 1 minute remaining. How long does multi-beam chrome injection last in the weaner?
Paula, will you address that question?
Yeah. In general, we recommend using multimin every 2.5, 3 months. This is about the average time that several research have been evaluating how long it lasts in the liver, in the blood, etc. So that's probably the average time that it lasts in the system. Some animals may last shorter time because they are starting from a lower point, and some other may last more time because they are utilizing less or they have more reserves starting with. But in general terms, it lasts for about 2.5, 3 months in terms of the activity of the antioxidant enzymes and also the reserves in the liver.
Great. Well, it's probably time to wrap up there. It's 8:30 on the dot. So we'll wrap up the webinar. Massive thanks to Paula and John for presenting tonight. If anyone does have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us and we'll get you in touch with the local Virbac representative. Remember, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available via email, which you should receive tomorrow. Thanks all to attending and taking a bit of time out of your evening. We hope everyone's had a really great week, and we hope to see you again at a future webinar. And with that, we'll close. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John. Have a
Yeah,
good
thank
day.
you. I enjoyed it. Good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.